Hello everyone, welcome to IMPRINT and I'm Varun Khullar, and today we'll be looking at the Indian Express and the Hindu Daily News Discovery for the day 7th of December 2018. Okay, so what all we'll be covering today? We'll be looking at the vulnerable sections of society, and a lot of articles are there on women, on tribals, and on transgender. Further, there is a debate on social media whether is social media polarizing society. This is extremely important. I would say this would be very useful for an essay. So, in last year, there was an essay that social media is an inherent selfish medium. So that kind of essay can be actually answered using this editorial. Then we have the OBC reservation. It talks about the fact that there's a certain castes which are actually capturing most of OBC reservation, Yadavs, Kurmis, etc. Right. Then we have malnutrition, youth. Right. Then we have India, China. There's an editorial about that. Then Facebook and privacy. Facebook basically is the next level evil, right? And it is using all kinds of shady things to actually profit. And Mark Zuckerberg seems to be the worst person in the world, right? Economy and environment news. Then we have ethics related article from Indian Express, and this is about Gandhi and reconstruction, right? So we'll go through these all. Okay, right. So let's start. So first is Naveen Patnaik, who is the Odisha Chief Minister. On Thursday, wrote to Chief Ministers of all states and union territories seeking their cooperation to ensure 33% reservation for women in Legislative Assembly and Parliament. And he says that women have played a major role in nation building and society. He says empowerment of women is the empowerment of the nation. No household, no society, no state, no country has ever moved forward without empowering its women. Okay. Now, obviously, the question can be straightforward in this: that what are the pros and cons of this, right? Obviously, pros are definitely going to be there. Remember, women are 47 to 48% of our population. Still, they do not have 10 to 11% representation in various assemblies and in the Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha. So hence, definitely this is required statistically. Cons, obviously, it can lead to elite capturing. And there has always been a debate whether the SC, STs and OBCs women also will get reservation inside this 33% thing, and that has been the major debate in this. Okay, then we have an example, and this example can be used by you in your essay, right? So this is about Shobha's story, and basically, Shobha Sanju, who lives in Kochi, is an unlikely hero. The misuse of social media upturned her world, but she refused to be victim. She picked up the pieces. So what happened, right? So 3 years ago, a nude video was circulated on WhatsApp by an employee at her husband's shop who claimed that the woman in the video was Shobha. She filed a police complaint, and after investigation by the cyber cell, the man who circulated the video was arrested. However, her husband refused to be convinced and moved out with their 3 children and filed for divorce. Right. So, as the petition was being processed, Sobha sought a reinvestigation and demanded conclusive proof. The State Forensic Laboratory had earlier held that the images in the video were unclear and sources could not be traced to establish her innocence. But what happened was the CDAC, that is Center for Development for Advanced Computing, conclusively, established the women in the video was not Shobha. And right, Shobha says her fight was to ensure that her children did not have to live with slander about their mother. And this is basically obviously remarkable because she refused to be subdued by the societal stigma associated with the crime. Right, and she was living in a state where society can be extraordinarily misogynistic, voyeuristic, and despite remarkably high standard of literacy and other development indices. And she refused to hide her identity during the pursuit of her justice. Her dignity, her self-respect was not compromised, and obviously, she's an exceptionally courageous individual. And I think all women in India should see her as an example. And her bravery basically highlights that it is a perpetrators who need to be on the run and needs to be shamed, right? Extremely good example for any essay, any article, any kind of even GS2 question paper or ethics example. All right, so this would be very useful. Then we have Ramchandra Guha, and he's speaking on gender equality. So let's hear his views. So, right, what Ramchandra Guha says: even after 70 years of independence, gender inequality runs deep in all spheres of life. That is what his first quote is. Okay. Right. He says 70 years odd years after independence, caste discrimination is pervasive in most parts of India, in the country as well as the countryside, and so is gender discrimination. He says in all sphere of public life, women are denied dignity, respect, education, employment, promotion, and voice, and they're often subject to horrific violence. So the need to renew and strengthen the struggle for gender and caste inequality is compelling. So this is very, something I think you can also use this kind of starting in your essay against, it's supposedly there's an essay on caste, right, in India. Okay. Then he says 100 years ago, when the movement against British rule gathered strength and gathered pace, the more reflective you were to battle the British. Today, you have to battle the society on the behalf of those who have been discriminated. Right. And when it comes to equality and the law, the Constitution abolished inequality and abolished untouchability and provided for positive discrimination, right, to overcome centuries of discrimination. But remember, women have no reservation, right? So this is there. He says law can definitely do things at a level of enactment. There is no inequality, but we have centuries of discrimination, and some kind of positive discrimination can be done, right? And he says there's no positive discrimination except in panchayats where the powers are very limited. So except Nimki Mukhya, we have nothing. So it is a very token kind of representation. You have women elected in panchayats, but there have been no devolution of, there's always the three Fs, the fund, functionary, and right, the functions. So all of them are actually not there, and the power actually has rested in the state secretariat. Right. So only with affirmative action at the level of state legislatures and parliament, we will see a level of progress that is possible. So, I think he's supporting, Naveen Patnaik in this. And he says when it comes to equality before God and in society, Dalits and if India have made more progress than women. He says Kerala was at the forefront of the 1920s, right, to allow Dalits to enter temples. The same is currently is about the entry of women. So he says in some ways we're having an untouchability against women itself. He says, I'm sure parts of India where Dalits are excluded from temples, right? But obviously they're very limited. But there were no women priests in any religion. So there is actually a lot of misogynism in all religions. So he says, I do not know, I have not studied it properly, but when it comes to equality before God, whether it is Hinduism, Islam, or Christianity, right, Dalits have made more progress than women. So basically saying that the women are the new Dalits of India in some ways. Okay, next is tribal, right, and very interesting thing has happened. Tribal groups in Rajasthan have demanded that the next elected government in the state reveal the status of each of the SDGs with the reference to the tribal community and declare a status target. And he says there's been no party which has, depicted its commitment to work for sustainable development of tribal people. Because remember, there are a lot of tribals in Rajasthan, and they reside mainly in South Rajasthan. And they said they should be recognized as custodian of the ecosystem, natures, and traditions should be paid an honorarium for their contribution for the preservation of natural resources, and their environmental friendly practices should also be highlighted in the Charter of Demands, right? Okay. So I think very, very interesting. And he says, 70% of the population, right? Mr. Jayesh Joshi, who's the head of this forum, Tribal Development Forum, and I think you can actually use this example in your essay and in your GS1 answers. He says 70% of the population in the tribal area depends on agriculture, which is primarily rainfed, and most of the government investment towards agriculture is dedicated to the irrigated crop area. And so he says some kind of sustainable mechanism should be done, and there should be broad-based subsidies to promote traditional farming. Right? He should say that this next government should take serious step for stopping the migration cycle triggered by lack of education, skills, and large family size, which has contributed to tribal people's poverty and obviously forcing them to leave forests and villages. So this is extremely, extremely important, right? And I think this is one area where India as a democracy has truly failed. Okay, transgender. Okay, now we have just an example, I think. Basically, there's a problem that, we have under section 394A of the IPC, punishment for sexual harassment, right? But it is only applicable in the case of women and not transgenders. So basically what the 21-year-old Delhi University transgender student has said she has actually gone to the Delhi High Court and she's seeking to lodge a sexual harassment case against her male classmate, right? And the police basically saying that obviously she's male, so obviously or she's transgender, so she really can't actually have any kind of sexual harassment case against him, right? She says she was subjected to lewd and sexually colored remarks by her male student on account of her feminine gender expression and personality, right? And obviously, center male, student also made unwelcome sexual advance to her, right? So obviously, and because of this, she was traumatized and was not able to appear for two of her papers in the final exam. And she says it's a violation of fundamental rights and contrary to the decision of the Supreme Court, right? And the court was also informed the police was clueless what sections to invoke when they basically receive such complaints, as the issues of transgender are not covered under existing law. So hence, I think we need to have a law for this. And I think till that time, I think some guidelines should be issued by the court in this regard. Okay. Then we have social media and society, and I think this is extremely important. If you have the newspaper today, please cut this and keep it with you. This will be very important for any essay, right? So it is Adwaita Kala, right? And she basically says that today we are finding ourselves to be more rigid versions of former self. Then we have Om Rotoy. He says that to blame social media for unrest is as senseless as blaming pamphlets for the French Revolution. And we have Osama Manzar. He says hopefully over time people will learn to take responsibility for what they share, right? So three different angles to the same thing. So let's look at what Adwaita Kala says. She says, think about it. 1.49 billion people on an average log on to Facebook daily. I just deleted my app, by the way, right? And every second, on average, around 6,000 tweets are tweeted on Twitter. And since the inception, 60 billion photographs have been posted on Instagram. I deleted that also. We live in a world, we aren't only consumers of information, but creators as well, which gives us a misplaced sense of control. It is misplaced because we live on a social media in filters, bubbles, echo chambers, and experiences are basically dictated by algorithms, right? And if let's say you tend to, what happens in Facebook is if you tend to like some certain page, let's say you are watching a lot of comedy shows or etc., and they basically will show you some clippings of Big Bang Theory, etc. They keep on doing that. Okay, and if you see it once, they keep on showing that. So the algorithm is actually working, and they are actually controlling you. And in some time, they'll make you your slave, maybe. Okay, but I think that's going too much. So social media and internet have drifted from the promise of closing distances and exposing us to the views who existed beyond our personal networks. Instead, we find ourselves to be more rigid versions of ourselves, because basically they keep on perpetuating the same thought process we have. And this was actually seen in the Cambridge analytic issues. Okay, then living in echo chambers in the 1950s, right? So a series of psychological experiments called the Asch conformity experiments were carried out by a social psychologist, Solomon Asch, and he said basically he wanted to determine the extent to a person's opinion is influenced by a group. He found out that a series of trials, that individual was willing to go to the extent of giving a wrong answer just to conform to the majority view. And this is actually very true. So I think this kind of experiment, this case study can be put in your various ethics GS paper 4 questions and also in your essay. The respondents gave wrong answers either because they did not want to be ridiculed or thought of as peculiar, or because they believed that the group was better informed than them. Although means of communication and engagement have evolved since the 1950s, the human instinct to fit hasn't changed. And he says to some extent this also explains the impact of online fake news, right? Because obviously, and it has contributed to a polarized society. He says that fake news is an industry and finds great resonance with people. Its rise corresponds to a growing distrust with mainstream media. Fake news has even slipped into traditional media outlets and often circulated by prominent individuals. This has contributed to the echo chamber phenomena. People seek informed opinions through filters, right, only from the people they trust, and only look for news that conform to their worldview. And obviously what it has done is that people have started cultivating rigid opinions of issues than they would actually be willing to discuss in the past. And obviously what has happened is social media is willing to play a better. Twitter, for example, routinely prompts you to follow people who hold a view similar to yours. And social media creates services needs which would be narcissistic, impulsive. Instagram, obviously, if you think about, you keep on posting your picture on Instagram, and what are you doing? And actually, if you're forgetting, you're actually wasting your time when you do that. Not open to diverse opinions, and that's another problem that has happened. So what a study by Aalto University, right, in Finland says that increasing polarization on social media, right, surrounded on factors like obviously users in social meat system tend to bond with those who are similar than to dissimilar, and there's algorithmic filtering and there's reinforcing of belief system, right? And this has actually ensured that we do not open our minds to diverse opinions, and the algorithm actually basically creates such kind of to identify trigger topics, and obviously so this is a big problem. So he says that while the democratization of discourse that social media has brought about is undeniable and almost welcome, we are getting trapped in a narrow worldview, and obviously this is kind of alarming. Okay. On the other hand, let's look at what Rothre says. He said, there's a beautiful story. He says a woman whose engagement ring fell into a drain in Times Square, right? There was a trending story about it, and he says, what happened? In less than 22 hours, the couple was, traced, and the ring was returned to them. And so obviously he says, people who blame social media for its ills, obviously for the divisive and fake news, forget that it's just a medium. And obviously, Me Too stories would not have found an outlet. There are many stories of lost children being found, dogs being adopted, money being raised for various causes on social media. And remember, people love to say social media is mainly responsible for violent regressive society of 2018, but it is true the social media was also used to garner support for a man who burnt a Muslim man on video in Rajasthan. But it's the same media also who raised money for a child whose my parents, right? The child was actually gang raped, and obviously this also was raised. So what does it say? It basically says that it's a tool. It's easy to blame technology because it's a new element in the old equation. Printing press was seen as trouble by the Ottomans, right? A speed at which books could be printed and distributed around caused suspicion. Ironically, the first the Greek printing house set up, right, obviously, printed a booklet targeting Jews. But remember, books is only a medium. Just like social media banning books and blaming media are the result of the same flawed logic. He says that social media is divisive, but what about television? Many would rage against TV, right? Because we have lovely Arnab Goswami, and if he should not be sent to jail, I don't think so. The reason is that he is as divisive as anybody can be, right? So the idea is that the news on channels of today are less hateful than the average troll on the social media. I think the troll on the social media are much more worse, but okay, I'll take his view for it for the time being. He says the number of daily active users on WhatsApp is 200 million, Facebook is 194, Twitter is 7.3, right? Still, by all accounts, social media is a new phenomena in India. He says, obviously, the problem is Facebook is now being blamed for fueling the yellow vest unrest in France. Facebook Live and other events have actually led to a nationwide protest, right? But obviously, if you blame Facebook for such a thing, it's as senseless as blaming pamphlets for French Revolution. Be it Facebook relevancy algorithm or Twitter's recommendation tweets, the platforms are designed to show you more of what you already engaged in, therefore increase your bias. While newer algorithms and AI are being used to spot and stop fake news, the debate will continue about free speech. So now the question is always, what is hate speech, what is humor, what is parody? And machine learning are in its infancy, and obviously we are a few years away from algorithms that can fight the evils of humanity. Finally, he quotes Aristotle. He says, Aristotle said the modes of persuasion are ethos, pathos, and logos, right? And he says that if these three in the society is skewed, then tell me what social media was back then. So basic idea is that it is the society which actually social media is actually reflecting. Maybe by it is magnifying it a bit, but not really. Okay. Then Osama Banzar, he talks about the presence of social media, making our lives highly complicated. He says the birth of social media is based on the democratic principle of the internet and its technological ability to be open and accessible to all. So obviously, it's a very beautiful thing. I can actually talk to anyone in the world, okay, through this medium. Now, that allows me to be an enabler and a polarizer. right? And he says that there's the enabling effect of social media has been no different from what it has been in other countries, right? It has given millions of people a platform to voice their opinion, right? It has given thousands of artists an opportunity to showcase their art, right? There's so many people who actually sing on the internet. There's so many people who actually show videos of their dancing so well. In the previous generation, it was just the Bollywood cinema, the cinema basically on the Hollywood. But right now, it is being blamed for breeding toxicity, promoting polarization, amplifying disinformation, birthing malicious intention, and swaying elections. Right? Remember how algorithms were less intelligent, yeah, right? And then you posted something on Facebook, and you were sure that all your friends would be able to see it and react. Now, obviously, today your post is only reaching a few because they're evolving algorithms, and obviously, unless you're willing to pay, that is, if you're actually not paying Facebook for ads, that's not going to happen. So obviously, what is happening is artificial intelligence and machine learning are predicting our next views. Let's say I deleted Facebook, I think maybe they're even predicting that as well. And while I can thank my phone for reminding where I park my car, I also can be skeptical of the data it is actually collecting on me, right? And today we look at another article, what Facebook has been doing to us, right? Social media is, right? Obviously, AI, by feeding its data, obviously it's creating millions of users, right, who basically push out disinformation, fake news created intentionally and unintentionally. Right. So what has happened is now we have fake accounts, disinformation, and misinformation. Right. So, but he says, on the other hand, I believe that it is still a tool for empowerment, especially for a country like India, right, where 70% of the population is yet to get online and leverage the opportunity. Right. So definitely, I think he thinks that yes, social media platforms will regain its lost trust, right, in some time, and people will become more and more responsible by sharing, right, what they are supposed to share. Okay, OBC reservation. Very quickly, it says that almost 97% of the admissions for the OBCs has gone through just a quarter of the subcaste, right? And who are then Yadav Kurmi Jats of Rajasthan, except those in Bharatpur, right? And Saini, Thewar, Hizwazaka, and Vokalinga. So these are the, basically, and that will always happen. There's always elite capturing in all castes. Even if you pick up SCs and STs, I think the worst is the STs, in which only there's a certain caste in Rajasthan who tends to take all the, UPSC seats, right? Majority of them, that is. And you'll always find that's going to happen. But that's, I think, a natural thing that will happen, right? You would expect that to happen. And you would expect that these people would become leaders in the, of those areas. But remember, the scheduled tribes and the scheduled castes and the OBCs are so disparately grouped that it's going to be difficult for that to happen unless there's a proper scheme by the government of India. So definitely something needs to be done. Right. Okay. And what is this? This is a consultation paper established by the Commission to re-examine the subcategorization of OBCs. Okay. Malnutrition figures. I think we've already gone through it yesterday, but look at this number. This is horrendous. India has more children wasting than Pakistan, than Bangladesh, right? And let's not even talk about everything else. So in India, 2 of every 5 children are stunted, which is higher than the global average of 21%, and wasting obviously is higher than the global mean. So this is crazy, and something needs to be definitely be done. And on the other hand, we have lovely Narendra Modi, who has actually cut down the amount of money to be required. So this is a huge problem, and we're doing really badly on the global hunger index as well. Okay, and we have a lot of areas in which the MPI, that is the multi-dimensional poverty index, right, has the highest level of stunting. So there is obviously the higher the MPI, the worse of obviously the district. And I think you should note down the names of these districts for your essay and your GS1 answers. Okay, youth. Okay, so the Population Foundation of India expressed concerns over the lack of commitment to address the challenges of nutritional, mental health, and reproductive health of adolescents and youth, right, in manifestos. See, there's a big problem. I remember having a discussion with one of my friends who's an IS officer, and we talked about this fact. I said, the problem with the midday meal scheme is one. He said, what? He said, the children can't vote. If the children could vote, what would happen? The midday meal scheme would have been the most prominently run scheme of India. And that is the real problem. Okay, so what is the reason? Right, basically, the focus of politicians seem to be attracting young voters with the promise of employment and skill development, right? And the deep analysis manifesto shows that they have left health dimensions completely untouched, other than the distribution of free sanitary pads and wash, sanitation, and hygiene. So this is the only thing they care about. Again, they're targeting just election votes. Okay, and the ruling BJP had actually promised to create 50 lakh jobs in self-employment and private sector in the last 5 years, and 30 lakh jobs in the government sector, and giving unemployment allowance to 5,000 to youth. Right. So again, not going to work. I think this is not good at all. Okay, witness protection scheme. Okay, I think we've talked about this yesterday, but let's look at it again. So what is this? So finally, we have a witness protection program, in place. It is a pending legislation by Parliament, and Supreme Court has said that, okay, before, Parliament is not doing its job. So what should we do? We should actually take it in our own hands, and it has actually framed a scheme to actually protect witnesses in criminal trials from threat. And this they have done because of Asaram Babu case. Okay, so the need to protect witness has been emphasized by Law Commission and court judgments for years, right? So witness turning hostile is a major reason for acquittals, and in this current system, there is little incentive for witnesses to turn up at court and testify against criminals. Besides having a threat to the life, they experience hostility, harassment while attending courts. And obviously, the tardy judicial process takes into account the distance they travel, right? What will happen is that the money they actually are losing when they come to court is hardly completely compensated. So obviously, Justice A.K. Sikri has pointed out the condition of the witness in the Indian legal system is pathetic and takes them for granted. Okay, so obviously it is gratifying the court has played a proactive role in getting the center and the state to come up with a concrete proposal. And the center deserves credit for coming forward to suggest that its draft witness scheme be introduced by judicial mandate instead of waiting for formal legislation. Now, why are they doing it? For the simple reason, this is the wonderful thing of this BJP government. Anything they want it done, they're doing it, letting the judiciary do it so that they do not get any vote backlash. Okay, or nobody can actually speak against them. Okay, in its minutiae, the scheme appears to be workable, but the efficacy will be confirmed only with the passage of time. It broadly classifies witnesses in the need of protection into 3 types based on threat assessment. A witness protection order will be passed by competent authority. The scheme will be funded by the budgetary support by the state government and donations. And obviously, this is variance with the state law commission recommendation that the center and the state share the cost equally. So this is something that is there. Basic features are in-camera trial, right? Proximate physical protection and anonymizing of testimony and reference to witnesses in the records are not difficult to implement. The real test obviously will be advanced from identity protection, giving the witness a new identity, address, or even parentage without matching documents. So this needs to be done without undermining the professional and property rights and educational qualification. And the introduction of the scheme marks obviously a leap forward. And until now, there have been ad hoc steps of concealing the identity of witnesses, anti-terrorism and child-centric laws, right? And they actually have been pathetic in India, right? Everybody knows Jyoti Singh's name despite being called Nirbhaya all her life, right? A few dedicated courtrooms for vulnerable witnesses, mostly child victims, are also functional. But expanding such facilities is a need of the hour, and which it actually will pose a logistical and financial challenge. But it can strengthen India's structuring criminal justice system. Okay, so let's start. Let's go again. Okay, this is in from the education sector. What has happened is the HRD ministry took unprecedented step of shifting the section of students from the NIT Uttarakhand to another state, and the students in the first, second, third year of the BTech campus will be shifted to a satellite campus in Jaipur for 3 years. And this is because of a 2-month protest because of the students because on the campus location, where a third year student was hit by a speeding car on NH8. Right. So basically, the shift obviously is a stopgap, right? Because of the problems that is there, right? And the Uttarakhand, issue is actually very, very weird. Okay. So anyhow, not really that relevant. I would say let's move ahead. Let's go ahead. Okay. India, China. I think. What Raja Menon, who's a former Rear Admiral of the Navy and is the author of a nuclear strategy for India, he talks about China's rise in this, and he says that India needs to formulate a strategic defense for the needs of the future. Okay, so let's go through this article. It says even a casual survey of the retired ICS officer, Penderel Moon, monumental work on the transfer of power from Britain to India, independent India, shows the joy in New Delhi eclipse any thoughts of the islands in the Indian Ocean, right? It took the benign intervention of Lord Mountbatten on the Indian side to force Whitehall not to retain the Andaman Nicobars and the Lakshadweep as the part of the wider British Ocean, Indian Ocean territories. In 1947, or even 2 decades later, there was no strategic community in New Delhi, and the earliest noises from India began to be only heard in the 1980s. Right? Panicked by the Pakistan attempt to capture Srinagar in 1947 and Chinese War of 1962 and the second attempt in 65, the entire government closed ranks and concluded India has only one strategic choice: to hold on to a territory the British has transferred to it. It was right strategy for the time to preserve our territorial integrity, and the foreign policy of non-alignment to get the best deal out of the Cold War obviously cannot be flawed. But now, obviously, what has happened is that the Cold War is gone, and Rajman says, who should we have alliance with, right? What should be India's focus, because we have a demographic decline in sometimes in the 2050s. Technology will threaten to change the world apart from geopolitics, right? And yes, yet we need to make our bets, because altering the strategy of a country takes a quarter of a century. Right, geopolitically, the defining event is the rise of China, and the biggest question is whether China take over the American hegemony by 2050. Right, and what kind of consequences it would have. Then we have been used to a world with the IMF and the WTO, right, in which the USA held sway, and there's a belief that liberal democracy is the way to wealth and prosperity, right, and it has now even been taught in colleges. Right, but that foundation of that belief is being rocked by China's, whose material prosperity runs parallel to the firm belief in the merits of authoritarian government. China is a dictatorship, so what is wrong in a dictatorship if it gives prosperity? Right. So now the question obviously is a debate now. So the consequences obviously can be earth-shaking. The proportion of US defense budget, from overseas deployment is almost 60%, and this is the amount, right, cannot be ignored. China also spends the same amount as US's democratic defense budget, nearly, but obviously it's quite less than that. Writing scenarios, right, to which base policy, right, whether India should go towards USA or to China is one question. The other thing that will we become a swing state? That is the normal question, right? $10 trillion GDP, we will be having by 2035, and we have a territorial integrity issue with China as well. Okay, so what scenarios are we working for? And that's the question, right? One, we have a scenario where the hegemon is a liberal Democrat whose foreign policy includes pushing its ideas over the world. On the other hand, we have a world to be led by China, an autocratic hegemon whose dreadful record of human rights, but it basically has an impressive war chest of $4 trillion, right, to have push its own riders of hegemony through the depth-driven diplomacy of One Road, One Belt. And its closest friends are Pakistan, China, and North Korea, and India will have to live one of these two scenarios. So this is what he's talking about. Okay, so basically he says there's a need for a think tank. Okay, and the Navy will have a primary task of influencing geopolitics, has no weapons to influence in the course of a land war, and obviously Air Force will still be obviously fighting with territorial airspace, right? So he says that integrated think tank need to be made with the national security staff, and defining scenarios need to be made for both of them, whether it's going to be China or USA. Okay, Facebook and privacy issue. This is much more interesting an article than the other, right? What has happened is Mr. Zuckerberg, right, has whitelisting agreement with certain companies, and what has happened is, there is the UK House of Commons, and 250 pages they have published, Digital Culture, Media, Sport Select Committee, and it has internal Facebook emails, right, which was basically these were part of the sealed evidence in the lawsuit filed by Facebook, right, by app developers 643 against Facebook, that is. And what do they have? Okay, so basically Facebook, in 2014-15 barred app developers from accessing data of friends. However, it created a special application programming interface to let some, firms like Badu, Hot or Not, Bumble, and Netflix to continue to have access to friends' data. Okay, and what it also did was, when necessary, we allowed developers to access the user's friends. Okay, and this was not friend's private information, but a list of a friend's name and his profile pic. And whitelisting was common in the time of testing new features. Okay, the other thing, very interesting thing they have is emails show that Facebook knew that the Messenger app update on Android that collect call log data and text by users would be controversial and a PR challenge, and they already knew they were doing that. Okay, so basically, people had the choice, right, of doing this, but obviously this is extremely evil, right? And then we have Onavo, a VPN app Facebook acquired in 2013, and they conducted global survey of usage of mobile apps by customers without their knowledge, including what apps they downloaded. So think about the evil guy Facebook is, right? And this helped Facebook tracking rising competitors and potential targets for purchase in future. Okay, and it basically the data actually showed that WhatsApp was rising fast with 8.2 billion set. So basically, Onavo creates a safer connection. Onavo collects information about app usage to gain insights into products and services people value, and obviously Facebook basically would buy them just to maintain their hegemony. So think about how evil Facebook is when they're doing that. Then Facebook restricted access for Vine, a 6-second video sharing service on Twitter, to its friends API, effectively killing the product because the users would not be able to find their friends on the service, right? And then Facebook launched its own short video format on Instagram. Okay, so Twitter launched Vine as the part of the NUX. You can find friends via Facebook. They will shut down their API access, right? Okay, so obviously this is again the case, right? Okay, so obviously Facebook's basically responded that we have made the decision to restrict app built on the top of a platform that replicate core functionality, right? But we are now removing this out of the policy. So all evil things this guy would do just to make more money. Anyhow, moving ahead, this is just this is from the front page from the Hindu, and it talks about the plastic beaches, right? So tourism, fishing, miscellaneous, and biomedical. So basically, tourism actually is bringing majority of pollution worries to India, beach pollution, right? And that's a big thing, right? Other than that, I think not so much. So basically, we need a national marine litter policy to control and manage waste on land and prevent its entry on the marine environment, right? Because fishing, obviously the fishes who are actually close to the beaches can get affected. Then we have wonderful. Look at this froth, and this is Beladu Lake in Bangalore. Okay, right. So the NGT, right, directed the state government to transfer 500 crore to an escrow account, and this would be utilized for the execution of action to clean the water bodies. Okay, so this is something that is definitely needed to be done. Okay, NGT basically forces the state government to basically give money to so that this kind of thing can be cleaned, and it is actually horrendous, this area in Bangalore. Okay, then we have Sujata Bravan, and basically the same things are being talked in this article itself, right? So what is the major thing? The major thing is that the Katowice COP24, basically what it's trying to do is going to make guidelines, set on rule book, implement pledges that were made by the various countries in 2015 in the Paris Agreement. Right, so that is the basic idea. Now the problem obviously is it's difficult to put the money where the mouth is. Okay, there was an idea that every year $100 billion would be given, but not going to happen. And we talked about this yesterday as well, right? But remember, we actually need something like 4.4 trillion, but even 100 billion is becoming a problem. And the idea is that till now only $30 billion according to the climate funds update. Right, just note this, and obviously 20 billion have been deposited and 4 billion had been dispersed. Okay, so again, this is a huge problem, right? So what's going to happen is it's going to be difficult, and I think most of this is going to be just talk, right? What's going to happen, according to The author is the fact that today's children are inheriting from their parents and grandparents an earth that is out of control and heading to be 2 to 3 degrees warmer than the end of the century. So, right, that's going to be a problem. And perpetual growth is not viable for any species. Business as usual policies with high consumption by the rich are driving the destruction of ecosystem and mass extinction. So she says that six mass extinction of species on Earth, which has been named by Paul Eldridge and Elizabeth Colbert, is ongoing, and there would be it would take us to an area which is beyond the scope of our imagination. And why is he saying that? It is because of this. He says that while the US and its current policies are being blamed for the current situation, Australia and USA have had its political turmoil due to their climate policies, even while experiencing severe weather events. Their protests on fuel charges hikes, they have rocked France. Europe is still reliant on coal, and European Union emissions are stable. They are not going down. UK is relying from fuel on fracking and have remarked that even advances in California supervision and do not address fundamental issues. Okay, so obviously a huge problem, right? Whether the rich countries, the developed countries, will give $100 billion a year to the developing countries, obviously time will tell. Let's move ahead. Okay, air pollution causes 1 in 8 death. We talked about this yesterday. Just note this down, right? It says that 12.4 lakh deaths in India were due to air pollution, and 6.5 are due to outdoor particulate matter, right? Particulate matter, and this is important. And he says the highest 2.5 exposure were in Delhi, followed by North Indian states of UP, Bihar, and Haryana. Okay, and this obviously leads to premature death and disease burden, right? And this is a huge problem. And what it says is the life expectancy in India would have been 1.7 years higher if the pollution level was less than the minimum. So this is there. This is the thing that I think you can use this data and this data, copy these two data, and then obviously copy this one as well. It says Delhi's air quality remains very poor, with several areas recording a severe air quality, and we have the AQI at 355, and obviously right now this is very poor in Delhi. Okay, right. So move ahead. Again, the same article from the Indian Express. It talks about death in UP, Maharashtra, Bihar, and West Bengal, and you can actually use this data again. So how many deaths in UP? 1,61,000. How many in Maharashtra? 63,000. How many in Bihar? 54,000. Bengal 43, Rajasthan 43, Bengal 50, Karnataka 26,000. And there's even household pollution, right? So it's typically the problem is obviously what will happen, right? The disease burden include heart disease, stroke, chronic obstruction, pulmonary disease, lung cancer. Obviously, all these are associated with smoking. Okay, so normally, a lot of people ask me to come to Delhi. I normally am afraid to come to Delhi because of this only, right? The average life expectancy in India would have been 1.5 years higher than if it was not obviously there. And northern states of Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh, and Haryana, it would have been 2.5, 2.2, and 2.1 year, obviously more, and obviously highest are in Delhi, Haryana, and Punjab. Okay, let's move ahead. Obviously, we have another article by Amitabh Sinha, and he says developed nations are obviously likely to fall short of the 2020 emission targets, right? And why is that? Obviously, we've already talked about this fact that developed countries are not doing enough. The emissions in EU are stable, right? And all developing countries basically, had reduced emissions by 16% from the 1990 level by the year 2016, but a rise in emission after that has meant that the year 2020 the emissions were to be only 11.4% less than the 1990 levels, well short of the 18% target. Okay, so this something that you should definitely note, and it has strengthened the voice of the developing countries who have pointed out that developed countries were not doing enough, and India has been rallying for support to ensure that emission gaps resulting from the inaction, in the developed countries is filled by the same countries in the post 2020 era. Right. Remember, till right now, what is happening? The targets are being governed by the Kyoto Protocol, and that's something you should note. It can come your objective time, right? Okay, let's move ahead. Economy news. We have a policy to doubling agriculture exports, right? And basically, it will market brand India, and would attract private investments in production and processing, and a strong quality regime will improve the research and development. Then cabinet also basically gave an proposal, in principle, approval for the strategic sale of government existing 63 total paid up capital in REC, right, to the PFC. This is wonderful. This is basically beautiful. This government keeps on doing that to actually just make sure that disinvestment target is achieved, right? By selling one government unit to another and making the other government, take unit actually taking loan for it. Okay, that seems to be the strategy. Right. Then there's a national mission on interdisciplinary cyber physical systems. This is important. Right. Outlays of this much, 3,600 crores, and it will have 15 technological hubs, 6 application hubs, and 4 technological hubs. So this is something important. So please note this down. What is happening in cybersecurity. And then CAD obviously will fall to 2.2 because of oil slide, and I think that's expected. Please just note this, make this diagram as well. Right. In any answer which is actually on oil. So the ongoing fall in price of oil has made the government rethink its projections for CAD for the year. And right now it was projecting for 2.8. Now it has been revised to 2.2. Right. And he says that when global oil prices were looked up to $80, it was expected to be 2.8. But now the officials are saying this will not happen, and will be wonderful. Right. The CAD for GDP in 2017-18 was 1.9. It was 0.6. Right, so wonderful, I would say, for India. Okay, and then we have Yogendra Alag, and basically he's criticizing India's position or shifting position and aligning with WTO, multinationals. So, what has happened is that Suresh Prabhu declared that old issues in WTO cannot be forgotten, but new ones to be addressed too. And basically, the Honorable Minister, with his declaration in the conference, right, changed the position on the behalf of the government of India, right, which fought for decades for its farmers and food subsidy for the poor, right. And the minister has now aligned itself with the interest of the corporate sector and its links with multinational MNCs and global financial agencies. And he also basically hit a blow on India's leadership in developing countries on this respect. Right, so this is. I think this obviously article has been written by Yogendra Alag, and he was in the Planning Commission and was a former minister, right? I think we'll need to wait for a rebuttal by Suresh Prabhu. So, right, whatever he has said maybe not be true, right? He has talked about a few things. I think the things you should know about the things like peace clause. It's something that you definitely should know. Right, what is peace clause? What are these subsidies in WTO? What are green box subsidies? Right. Right. He says that we must protect food security and farmer programs, and this will provide a basis for no challenge clause. Prabhu has repeatedly working to defend on the public stock taking in his green box over 10% subsidy limits, and obviously he's willing to give it low priority. And this is important because India needs to escape the so-called peace clause of 4 to 8 years, right? Giving up eventual abolition of hunger over temporary relief from global grain cartels. So this is one of the big issues, definitely, right? So I would suggest that please go through this peace clause and green box subsidies from the WTO website. What are these? Okay. Then we have Christopher Jaffelot, and he's from King's in India Institute in London, and he has. This is an article very important. So this is an article very important for any political science optional person. So he says, in the aftermath of the demonstration by farmers in the name of agriculture prices and loan waiving, it is important to remember that Indian villages comprise of landless basins also, right? And which policy actually has been made for them is the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee, and this was initialized by the UPA in 2005. But he says that NREGA was one of the ambitious events, right? And it was an ambitious attempt to fight mass poverty in post-independence India, paying 100 years of minimum wages to any rural family affected by joblessness. And obviously, the NREGA budget was 0.6% of GDP. And what it did was it increased the rural minimum salary from 65 to 162 rupees a day. right? What it did was it obviously the BJP, right, whose core is basically the urban middle class and new middle class, right? Basically, because it affected them, BJP held it to be a bad scheme. The problem with Narega obviously has been the fact that BJP obviously is against it, right? So what has happened? They have actually subverted Narega, and basically they've said is that the number of people who have worked 100 days a year have dropped from 4.7 lakh to 1.7 lakh in just 1 year of their government. And the people who worked average number of days were 39, despite the fact we had demonetization, we had so much issue problems, right? And workers were not paid within the 15 days as they should be. Only 28% have been paid on time, and this was when demonetization had made their lives very, very difficult. And there were droughts in 2015, and there were severe droughts, right? There were heat waves, etc., right? What should actually would have happened is that the circumstances should have converted the 100 days to 150, but what has happened is the money spent in this has come down. Okay, uh, so for the political science optional people, I think this side of the article is very interesting, right? It talks about the bullock capitalists, right? With Suzanne and Lloyd Rudolph, professors, right, of sociology. They basically talked about this, and they said that these people were having only 2.5 to 15 acres land, but what they did was they had a sense of organization and the capacity for mobilization. And basically, they came in hundreds of thousands to Delhi in 1978 to celebrate the birthday of their main leader, that is Charan Singh. So again, very interesting, right? The other is, what they actually did was they basically subsumed the class politics in rural India. And obviously, Charan Singh emphasized the opposition between the two, urban, rural, and India and Bharat, right? So this is a huge, huge thing, right? So I think that's something. Then he said he paid no attention to the landless laborers who worked in the fields of others, and new agrarism was a new populism. D.N. Dhangre argued convincingly that this brand of population continued to prevail under the aegis of the Bharatiya Kisan Union, right, which culminated in 1989 when peasants camped in Delhi for days. Now, the same thing has happened, right? So what's going to happen? That's something. So what Christopher Jaffalot says is the landless peasants are probably, with the Adivasis and farmers, the main victim of the agriculture crisis. And will the Kisans take care of the interests? Maybe they might not. Maybe they will, right? Or they will look them as a different world, right? And many of them are Dalits, so obviously this is going to be another, whether it will lead to further intensification of conflict, that is another thing. And would it lead to more rural distress? Another one. Okay, let's go ahead. Okay, then we have Vinu Madhav Govindu, and very interesting thing he's talked about in this. He says Gandhi's conception of Purna Swaraj, or complete independence, went beyond the removal of colonialism. And that is why you would remember Gandhi, when the Chauri Chaura incident happened, took back the non-cooperation movement. What he argued was for political, social, and economic freedom, and freedom in every sense of the term. And throughout the 1930s, Gandhi was concerned with the quality of freedom, in a future-free India, right, was very important. And he says ordinary citizens had limited education, skills, and resources. And there's a challenge of economic justice, and that the masses could actually be meaningful actors in the economy of the country. And it was this demand of justice that led him to the attention to the need of the village. And that is why Gandhi wanted the village to be the unit of Indian democracy. Okay, so what Venugopal Madhav says is that Gandhi always had its share of admirers and detractors. Many of a leftist persuasion see him as a Borges representative, right? Because remember, Gandhi has very close ties with Billas and Sarabhais, right? Who are actually magnates of India, right? And he's basically was looked at, he mobilized the masses only to neutralize their inherent revolutionary potential. That India could have been totally socialist if it not for Gandhi, right? And but there's left-leaning historians like David Hardiman, right? He basically, despite the fact was a founding figure of the influential subaltern school. Hardiman was a very important historian of modern India. And he has actually talked about the Kheda Satyagraha in his book, right? Peasants Nationalists of Gujarat, Kheda, in 1917-34, right? And basically talks about what was Gandhi's influence, right? So that's something that this article talks about. Then obviously it talks about Gandhi devoted his energy to India's freedom as well as a range of social economic interventions that were clubbed under the rubric of constructive work. So what Gandhi always did was, whenever the revolution ended, he actually focused on village constructive work, right, and on sanitation, on khadi, on village industries, on basic education, etc. Right. Second, right. Gandhi obviously has a lot of emphasis, a lot of scholarly attention has gone to his political leadership, but obviously little research has been carried, into his understanding of his constructive work. Why did he devote his life to khadi? Right. Was it only a symbol? Whether it was more than that? Remember, subsequent to the Pune Pact in 1933-34, he took a nationwide campaign against untouchability. His experiences and thinking in the period deeply informed that the shape of the constructive work in 1930s, right? And remember, at that time we had severe distress, agrarian distress during this period because of the consequences of the Great Depression. Secondly, the sharp differences emerged between Gandhi and the Congress leadership during this period itself. And Gandhi was influenced by unhappy experiences of running khadi activities under the umbrella of the Congress in the 1920s as well. So obviously that is the case, right? Remember, Gandhi was not a part of India during the independence, and Gandhi had resigned from the Congress in 1934 and has founded, right, the All India Village Industries Association, and moved to Sevagram, right? And obviously Gandhi mandated that the IVR was to be run by independent workers of the political activities of the Congress, and they had to actually sign pledges to refrain from any form of political activity. And why he did so? Because obviously he wanted to carve out an autonomous sphere for constructive work, and wanted to basically unyoke it from the disinterested Congress, right? So the idea was that Gandhi actually did a lot of things. Okay, then Gandhi introduced the radical approach of Nai Talim to make elementary school more accessible, right, and meaningful to all children, right, and that was another thing. And he said that we need to have complete independence to truthful and non-violent means, right, and he also titled pamphlet, constructive program, its meaning and place. And Gandhi basically, realized that this constructive work has a lot of efficacy and urgency. Okay, but remember, Gandhi met with lesser success in his constructive work compared to his political campaign, and arguably, constructive work can be thought of as a different mode of politics, right? And his economic model that he placed on the individual and the agrarian economy at the center, right? Instead, looked to modern, right? Because remember, Nehru wanted industrialization, large-scale industrialization. Gandhi wanted constructive work and village economy and khadi and village industries, etc., to be actually be the maker of modern India. Okay, so right, but what Madhav Govindu says is that much like his non-violent politics approach, Gandhi's thinking on constructive work also offers useful contemporary lessons to those who are willing to listen and learn. Right, so obviously high growth rates are there, but there are problems of social and economic inequalities, and Gandhi's method of village reconstruction can definitely go a long way in this. Right, thank you so much for listening. Like, comment, share, or subscribe. If you have any questions, doubts regarding any article, feel free to comment.